2:47 p.m., March 18, 1945, Hauptmann Hans Waldmann's hands, trembling, gripped the control stick of his Messerschmitt Me 109G as he touched down on the scarred runway at Lechfeld Air Base. Just outside Munich, the engine sputtered once, twice, then died. Silence, the kind of silence that follows trauma. Ground crew rushed toward his aircraft, expecting the usual post-mission routine: fuel check, ammo count, damage assessment, but Waldmann didn't move. For 47 seconds, he sat frozen in the cockpit, staring at nothing. When he finally climbed down, mechanics noticed his flight suit was soaked through with sweat, despite the near-freezing temperature at 25,000 feet. He walked past the debriefing officer without a word, past the operations room, straight to the commandant's office. What happened next would be documented in a classified Allied intelligence report discovered in 2003. 73 pages of testimony that revealed not just what American P-51 Mustangs could do, but what they did to the men who faced them. Hans Waldmann had just watched 3 of his wingmen die in 8 minutes. And he had decided, right there at 2:47 p.m. on a cold March afternoon, that he would never fly combat again. You need to understand something about Hans Waldmann before we go any further. This wasn't some fresh-faced recruit making a panic decision after his first taste of combat. Waldmann was a 12-year veteran of the Luftwaffe. He'd flown since 1933, survived the Battle of Britain, the Russian front, North Africa, Sicily. 47 confirmed kills. The Knight's Cross with oak leaves hung around his neck. He was exactly the kind of pilot Germany desperately needed in March 1945, and he walked away. The story of what happened in those 8 minutes over Bavaria reveals something that changed the air war forever. It wasn't just about superior American technology. It was about the moment when experienced Luftwaffe pilots realized that no amount of skill, courage, or determination could overcome what the United States had built. Let me take you back to the morning of March 18, 1945. The briefing came at 6:15 a.m. Major Wilhelm Herget, squadron commander, stood in front of a wall map covered in red marks. Every mark represented an American bomber formation that had penetrated German airspace in the previous 72 hours. There were so many marks. The map looked like it had measles. Herget's voice was steady, but everyone in that room could hear the exhaustion underneath. 400 B-17s and B-24s targeting Munich's rail yards and the remaining aircraft factories at Augsburg. Expected time over target, 1:30 p.m. Escort P-51 Mustangs from the 357th Fighter Group, 8th Air Force. The room went quiet at that last part. P-51 Mustangs. By March 1945, that designation carried a psychological weight that's hard to understand today. Imagine being told you're about to face an opponent who's faster than you, climbs better than you, turns tighter than you, has more firepower than you, and can stay in the air 3 times longer than you can. An opponent that shot down 9 of your comrades in the last week alone. An opponent that seems to appear out of nowhere and disappear into nothing. That was the P-51 Mustang to German pilots in early 1945. The writing was on the wall. Waldmann sat in the back row with his 3 wingmen: Klaus Meyer, 23 years old, from Hamburg, 71 missions; Otto Becker, 19, from a small farming town near Dresden. His father had been killed by Allied bombs 3 months earlier. And Dieter Schmidt, 26, newly married, his wife 6 months pregnant back in Stuttgart. 4 pilots, 4 Me 109Gs. Scramble time, 1:15 p.m. The Messerschmitt. Me 109G, known to Allied pilots as the Gustav, was the workhorse of the Luftwaffe in 1945. It wasn't a bad aircraft. In 1941, it had been one of the best fighters in the world, but this was 1945. The Gustav Waldmann flew that day had been built in an underground factory by forced labor. Quality control was a joke. The Daimler-Benz DB605 engine had seen better days. Maximum speed, 387 miles per hour at optimal altitude. Combat radius, maybe 200 miles if he was lucky. Armament, one 30mm cannon through the propeller hub, two 13mm machine guns over the cowling. On paper, the Me-109G looked competitive. On paper doesn't mean much at 25,000 feet. When four P-51 Mustangs come screaming out of the sun, the American P-51D Mustang that Waldmann would face that afternoon represented something that Nazi engineers had tried and failed to replicate: perfect synthesis of power, range, and agility. Powered by the Packard VV1650 Merlin engine. A licensed copy of the British Rolls-Royce Merlin built in American factories, the P-51D produced 1,795 horsepower, maximum speed 437 miles per hour. 50 miles per hour faster than the Me-109G, combat radius with drop tanks, 1,650 miles. That meant a P-51 could fly from England to Berlin, fight for 20 minutes over the target, and fly back to England. The Me-109G could barely make it from Munich to the Swiss border and back, but speed and range weren't what broke German pilots. It was the invisibility. 1:18 p.m. 4. Me-109Gs lifted off from Lechfeld Air Base and climbed hard toward the incoming bomber stream. Waldmann led the formation in a shallow climbing turn, gaining altitude as quickly as the struggling DB605 engine would allow. At 15,000 feet, he spotted them, contrails, hundreds of contrails stretching across the sky, like chalk lines drawn by a giant hand. The bombers were at 23,000 feet, still 15 minutes from Munich. Standard Luftwaffe doctrine in March 1945 was simple: climb above the bombers, dive through the escort, make one firing pass, and bug out. No dogfighting and no heroics. One pass. The Me-109G didn't have the fuel for anything more elaborate. Waldmann's Wingmen tucked in tight. They'd flown together for 7 months. They knew each other's moves. They trusted each other. Meyer flew his right wing. Becker and Schmidt covered the left and rear at 22,000 feet. Waldmann began his turn to attack position. The bomber stream was 3 minutes away. He scanned the sky above and behind the B-17s. Looking for the escorts. Standard procedure. P-51s typically flew 5,000 feet above the bombers, weaving back and forth in what Allied pilots called the combat spread formation. Waldmann saw nothing. That should have been his first warning. An ominous sign. 2:34 p.m. Waldmann positioned his formation for the dive. He'd done this hundreds of times. Throttle forward, nose down, build speed. The bomber formation grew larger in his windscreen. He could see the waist gunners tracking his approach. Tracers began reaching up toward him, lazy arcs of light that seemed slow, until you remembered they were moving at 2,800 feet per second. He was just 3 seconds from firing range when Otto Becker's voice crackled over the radio. "Mustangs, high right!" Waldmann's head snapped right. Nothing. Empty sky. Where the hell? Then he saw them. 4 P-51 Mustangs in a shallow dive. Coming out of a cloud bank that hadn't been there 10 seconds ago. Altitude advantage, speed advantage, position advantage, everything. Waldmann had maybe 2 seconds to decide. Commit to the bomber attack and take the Mustangs on his tail, or break off and try to fight. Neither option was good. He chose survival. He broke left, hauling the Me-109G into a hard climbing turn, trying to gain altitude and speed simultaneously. The engine screamed. The airframe shuddered. His vision grayed at the edges from the G-force. Meyer and Schmidt followed him into the turn. Becker hesitated for half a second, maybe thinking he could still make the shot on the bomber. That half second, killed him. The lead P-51 pilot, Lieutenant James Browning of the 357th Fighter Group's 364th Fighter Squadron, had started his dive 8 seconds earlier. He'd spotted Waldmann's formation when they were still at 18,000 feet, climbing slowly, predictably. Browning had altitude, he had speed, and he had 6 Browning M2 50 caliber machine guns, each loaded with 1,280 rounds of ammunition. Total weight of fire, 450 rounds per second. Browning's aircraft dove through 23,000 feet, doing 460 miles per hour. His wingman, Captain Richard Peterson, stayed locked on his right wing, matching every move. 2 more P-51s split wide, setting up to cut off any escape route Waldmann's formation might take. This was what P-51 pilots called a bounce: altitude advantage, speed advantage, numbers advantage. The bounce was textbook. It was also execution. Becker realized his mistake and broke hard right, trying to turn into the attack. The Me-109G responded sluggishly. At 22,000 feet, the thin air made every control input feel like moving through molasses. Becker's turn was 3 degrees too shallow. Browning adjusted his dive angle by 2 degrees and pressed the trigger. 6 streams of 50 caliber rounds converged on Becker's aircraft. The first rounds hit the left wing root. Aluminum skin peeled away like paper. The second burst walked up the fuselage, shattering the canopy. The third burst hit the engine. The Daimler-Benz DB605 exploded. From Waldmann's perspective, Becker's aircraft simply disintegrated. One moment it was there, banking right. The next moment it was a cloud of debris and flame tumbling toward the earth below. No parachute, no time. Becker was 19 years old. He'd been flying combat for 6 months. The entire engagement, from first contact to Becker's death, took 4 seconds. Meyer saw it happen. He broke harder left, trying to stay with Waldmann. Schmidt had already reversed, diving away from the fight, trying to gain speed. Standard evasion tactic: dive, build speed, extend away from the threat. The Me-109G was good in a dive, not as good as a P-51, but good enough to maybe create some separation. Peterson, Browning's wingman, rolled inverted and pulled through, following Schmidt's dive. The P-51D had one significant advantage that the Me-109G couldn't match: structural strength. The Mustang's airframe could handle dives that would tear a Me-109 apart. Peterson pushed his aircraft past 500 miles per hour, closing on Schmidt like a falcon on a pigeon. Schmidt saw him coming. He pushed the dive steeper, pulling 6 Gs. Then 7. The Me-109's airframe groaned. Warning lights flashed on the instrument panel. Schmidt ignored them. He had to extend, had to get away, had to. Peterson fired from 400 yards, too far for accurate shooting, but he wasn't trying for accuracy. He was trying for fear. The 50 caliber rounds streaked past Schmidt's canopy, close enough that Schmidt could see them. Close enough that the psychological impact was worse than a direct hit. Schmidt panicked. He pulled out of the dive too early, bleeding off speed, trying to turn back toward friendly territory. It was exactly what Peterson wanted him to do. The P-51 had energy advantage, altitude advantage, and now position advantage. Peterson pulled his nose up, led the turn by 3 degrees, and fired again. This burst hit. Schmidt's right wing folded upward at a 90-degree angle. The aircraft snap-rolled twice and entered a flat spin. At 18,000 feet, Schmidt finally got the canopy open and bailed out. His parachute deployed at 14,000 feet. He would survive the jump. He would not survive the injuries. Schmidt died in a field hospital 6 hours later. His wife received the notification 3 days after that. Their daughter was born in June. Schmidt never knew if it was a boy or a girl. 2 wingmen gone in 90 seconds. Waldmann and Meyer were alone now, 24,000 feet over Bavaria, with 4 P-51 Mustangs hunting them. The bomber stream flew on, untouched. The mission would continue. The bombs would fall on Munich, and Waldmann had a choice that wasn't really a choice at all. He could run, or he could die. Meyer's voice on the radio. "Where are they?" Waldmann scanned the sky. The P-51s had disappeared again. That was the thing about Mustangs. They didn't chase you. They positioned. They waited. They picked the moment when you were most vulnerable. And then they struck. Waldmann leveled out at 25,000 feet and turned southwest, toward Lake Constance and neutral Switzerland. He wasn't planning to cross the border. He just needed distance, needed time to think, needed the P-51s to break off the pursuit. They didn't break off. Browning and Peterson had climbed back to 27,000 feet and were tracking Waldmann's formation from above and behind, perfectly positioned in his blind spot. The other 2 P-51s had split wide, one high, one low, creating a box with no exits. This was fighter doctrine perfected. This was what American pilots trained for every single day in 1944 and 1945. Teamwork, position, patience. 2:41 p.m. 6 minutes since the initial contact. Waldmann was 11 miles southwest of Munich, heading toward the Alps. His fuel gauge showed 32 minutes of flying time remaining, not enough to make it back to Lechfeld. He'd have to land at a forward field, refuel, and then... Browning decided it was time. The 4 P-51s dove simultaneously, 2 from high, 2 from the flanks, coordinated perfectly. Meyer saw them first. He shouted into the radio. Waldmann's head snapped left, then right, then up. They were everywhere. 4 directions at once. No escape route, no counter-maneuver, just execution. Meyer broke right into the nearest threat. It was the wrong move. When you're outnumbered 4-2 and they have energy advantage, there are no right moves. There are only moves that delay the inevitable. Meyer's turn placed him squarely in the crosshairs of a low-flying P-51 Mustang, piloted by Second Lieutenant Thomas Walsh, a 21-year-old kid from Boston, who'd been in the European theater for just 8 weeks. Walsh had never shot down an enemy aircraft before. Back in Florida, his training officer had drilled into him, "When you get the shot, take it. Don't think, don't hesitate. Just squeeze the trigger and count the hits." Walsh squeezed the trigger. The 650 caliber machine guns roared. The first burst missed. The second burst ripped into Meyer's right wing, tearing off the aileron. The third burst slammed into the engine. The fourth burst tore through the cockpit. Klaus Meyer, 23 years old, from Hamburg, with 71 missions under his belt, died instantly. His Mi-109G continued flying for another 12 seconds, carried only by momentum, before the right wing folded, and the aircraft spiraled into an uncontrollable death spin. No parachute, no last words, just gone. Waldmann watched it happen. He didn't have time to process the horror. All 3 wingmen dead in 8 minutes. He had Browning on his tail now, closing fast. He could see the Mustang in his rear-view mirror, growing larger and larger. The American pilot wasn't even rushing, just closing, methodical. Professional, inevitable. Waldmann faced 2 stark options: fight and die, or surrender and live. He rolled his aircraft 90 degrees to the right, exposing its underbelly to Browning's guns, the universal signal of surrender in air combat. Then he pushed the nose down, diving away from the fight, heading for the nearest German airfield at maximum speed. Browning didn't fire. He shadowed Waldmann down to 12,000 feet, maintaining perfect position on his tail. Guns armed, finger on the trigger. If Waldmann had made one wrong move, shown any sign of aggression, Browning would have shot him down without hesitation, but Waldmann didn't make a wrong move. He flew straight and level, throttle back, toward Lechfeld Air Base. Browning escorted him all the way to the airfield boundary, then broke off and climbed back to altitude to rejoin his squadron. The entire engagement had lasted just 8 minutes and 23 seconds. 3 Me-109s destroyed, 1 allowed to limp home. The bomber stream continued toward Munich. All 400 bombers dropped their devastating loads. The Munich rail yards were pulverized. 2 Augsburg aircraft factories were rendered inoperable. Total American losses: 2 B-17s to flak, 0 to enemy fighters. The P-51 Mustangs of the 357th Fighter Group landed back in England at 5:47 p.m. Beer flowed freely in the officers' club. Browning was credited with 2 kills. Walsh scored his first, Peterson got 1 damaged, and at Lechfeld Air Base at 2:47 p.m., Hans Waldmann shut down his engine, climbed out of his cockpit, and walked, with heavy steps, to the commandant's office. The debriefing dragged on for 3 agonizing hours. The classified transcript stretches to 73 pages, but the essence of Waldmann's testimony can be distilled into 2 chilling paragraphs. He stated that the P-51 Mustang had rendered air combat unwinnable for the Luftwaffe. Not difficult, not challenging, unwinnable. He asserted that no amount of training, skill, or sheer courage could compensate for the overwhelming technical superiority of American aircraft and the ruthlessly effective tactical doctrine of American pilots. He confessed that every time he'd faced P-51s, he'd survived purely through luck, not skill. And luck always runs out. He declared he would not ask his pilots to sacrifice themselves for a lost cause. With a gesture of finality, he removed his Medal of Honor equivalent, placed it on the commandant's desk, and requested immediate reassignment to ground duties. He was 32 years old. He had 47 confirmed kills, and he was utterly done. The commandant, Oberst Heinrich Bauer, accepted Waldmann's resignation. He had little choice. By March 1945, Luftwaffe pilot morale had cratered so profoundly that forcing experienced aviators to fly combat missions was, quite simply, counterproductive. They'd either desert, surrender, or succumb to psychological paralysis in combat, effectively getting themselves killed. It was deemed more prudent to reassign them to training or administrative roles, and to concentrate resources on the dwindling number of pilots who still clung to the faint hope of victory. Waldmann spent the remainder of the war training fresh-faced recruits in aircraft recognition and evasion tactics. After the war, he was subjected to extensive interviews by Allied intelligence officers who sought to unravel the psychological impact of overwhelming air superiority. His testimony formed a cornerstone of the foundational doctrine for modern air combat. Control of the air is achieved not only through technological supremacy, but also through the systematic destruction of enemy morale. The story of Hans Waldmann resonates deeply because it exposes a truth that cold statistics can never fully capture. Yes, the P-51 Mustang decimated more enemy aircraft than any other Allied fighter. Yes, it boasted superior speed, range, and firepower. Yes, American industrial might churned out over 15,000 Mustangs between 1942 and 1945. Those are undeniable facts. But facts alone can't convey the sheer terror, the creeping sense of doom that permeated the ranks of those on the receiving end of American air power. Waldmann's testimony provides that chilling insight. He depicted the P-51 as an aircraft that fundamentally reshaped the psychology of air combat. Before the Mustang's ascendance, Luftwaffe pilots still harbored the belief that they could snatch victory in individual engagements through superior skill and tactics. The Me-109 and FW-190 were formidable aircraft in their own right, and German pilots were indisputably among the best trained in the world. But the P-51 ruthlessly stripped skill from the equation. It didn't matter how good you were. It didn't matter how seasoned you were. The P-51 would always be higher than you, faster than you. And there would always be more of them. Always. That's what shattered the Luftwaffe, not merely the losses. Losses are an inevitable part of war. What truly broke them was the dawning realization that victory was impossible, that every mission had devolved into a desperate fight for survival, not combat, that going up to confront P-51 Mustangs was, in essence, suicide with extra steps, a slow, drawn-out, agonizing descent into oblivion. Other German pilots echoed Waldmann's grim assessment. Oberleutnant Franz Stigler, who famously escorted a crippled B-17 to safety in 1943, recounted in a 1991 interview that by 1945, the mere sight of P-51s was akin to receiving a death sentence. You couldn't outrun them, you couldn't outfight them. All you could do was desperately pray they didn't see you. General Lieutenant Adolf Galland, commander of Germany's fighter forces, lamented in his memoirs that the P-51's arrival over Germany in early 1944 marked the definitive end of the Luftwaffe as an effective fighting force. The remaining year of combat was nothing more than a grim, inevitable clean-up operation. The P-51 Mustang's technical superiority stemmed from an unlikely collaboration between American and British engineering genius. The original P-51A, conceived in 1942, was powered by an American Allison engine and suffered from lackluster high-altitude performance. It was a solid aircraft, but not truly exceptional. Then, a stroke of brilliance. What if we shoehorned a British Rolls-Royce Merlin engine into an American airframe? The result was the P-51B, which entered service in late 1943, and the refined P-51D, which emerged as the definitive variant in 1944. The Packard Phi 1650 Merlin engine, built under license in Detroit, transformed the Mustang from merely good to utterly unstoppable at 25,000 feet, where much of the air war over Germany was fought. The Merlin-powered P-51 had a significant power advantage over every German fighter except the jet-powered Me-262. And the Me-262 was so rare and so maintenance-intensive that it barely factored into the war. But the engine alone didn't make the P-51 dominant. It was the combination of engine, airframe, and mission doctrine. The P-51's laminar flow wing, designed by North American Aviation's engineers, reduced drag and increased range. The internal fuel capacity of 269 gallons, combined with two external drop tanks carrying 110 gallons each, gave the Mustang a combat radius that German intelligence initially refused to believe. The armament of 650 caliber Browning M2 machine guns provided overwhelming firepower, and the quality of American pilot training, combined with numerical superiority, created a tactical advantage that skill alone couldn't overcome. German engineers tried to replicate the P-51's capabilities. They failed, not because they lacked talent, but because they lacked resources. By 1944, Germany's industrial base was being systematically destroyed by Allied bombing. Fuel production had collapsed, aluminum was scarce, skilled labor was being drafted into military service. The aircraft they did manage to produce were often flown by pilots, with less than 30 hours of flight training. Compared to the 400-plus hours American pilots received before entering combat, the asymmetry was staggering. In 1944, the United States produced over 40,000 aircraft. Germany produced 18,000. In 1945, American production continued at full capacity, while German production collapsed entirely. By March 1945, when Waldmann refused to fly, the Luftwaffe had fewer than 1,000 operational fighters left. The 8th Air Force had over 3,000 P-51 Mustangs. Waldmann knew these numbers. Every Luftwaffe pilot knew them. They'd been briefed on American production capacity. They'd seen the endless streams of bombers, escorted by endless swarms of P-51s. They knew they were fighting an enemy, with infinite resources, against their own dwindling supplies, and they knew that every mission might be their last. That knowledge created a psychological weight that statistics can't measure. Waldmann carried that weight. For 8 minutes, on March 18, 1945, he watched 3 friends die. He survived through mercy, not skill, and he realized that tomorrow, or the day after, or the day after that, his luck would run out too. So, he walked away. The families of Meyer, Becker, and Schmidt received telegrams 3 days later. Standard notification: your son died in service to the Reich. No details about how, no explanation of what happened in those 8 minutes. Over Bavaria, just a telegram, a medal sent in the mail 6 weeks later, and a lifetime of unanswered questions. Klaus Meyer's mother kept his room, exactly as he'd left it. His uniform hanging in the closet, his flight logbook on the desk. She died in 1962, never having moved a single item. Otto Becker's younger brother joined the Luftwaffe in April 1945, hoping to avenge his brother's death. He was shot down by P-51s on his 3rd mission. 2 brothers, 2 months apart, both killed by American Mustangs. Their mother didn't speak for 6 years. Dieter Schmidt's daughter, born in June 1945, grew up knowing her father only through photographs and letters. She kept a picture of him in his flight suit on her nightstand her entire life. She died in 2019 without ever knowing the details of how he was killed or why. These weren't statistics. They were sons, brothers, fathers, human beings, with families waiting for them, with lives unlived, with futures stolen. War takes many things, but what it takes most is potential. The man Meyer might have become, the life Becker never lived, the daughter Schmidt never held. Those losses compound across generations. They echo through time in ways that no victory or defeat can fully account for. Waldmann knew this. That's why he walked away. He couldn't save Meyer, Becker, or Schmidt. But he could stop adding names to the list. He could stop writing telegrams to mothers and widows. He could stop being part of a machine that consumed young men and produced only grief. The American pilots who shot them down that day had no idea who they'd killed. To Browning, Peterson, and Walsh, they were just enemy contacts, targets destroyed, victories credited. They landed back in England, drank beer, played cards, and went to sleep. The next morning, they flew another mission and did it all again. That's how war works. You don't think about the men in the other aircraft. You can't. If you did, you'd never be able to pull the trigger. James Browning flew 97 combat missions between December 1944 and May 1945. He was credited with 11 aerial victories, making him an ace. He returned to the United States in August 1945, married his high school sweetheart, and worked as a commercial pilot for 38 years. He died in 1998 at the age of 76, surrounded by family. He never knew he'd fought against Hans Waldmann, never knew that one of his victories had been the final straw that broke a German ace. History is full of connections like that, intersections of fate that the participants never recognize. Richard Peterson survived the war with 9 confirmed kills. He stayed in the Air Force and flew in Korea and Vietnam. He retired as a colonel in 1973 and spent his remaining years teaching aviation history at a community college in Texas. He died in 2007. Thomas Walsh, the young pilot from Boston who got his first kill that day, didn't make it home. He was shot down by flak over Dresden. 3 weeks after the engagement with Waldmann, he was 21 years old. His name is on the wall at the Cambridge American Cemetery in England, along with 5,126 other Americans who died in the air war over Europe. The machinery of war continued without them. The bombers kept flying. The P-51s kept escorting. The Luftwaffe kept dying. By April 1945, German resistance in the air had collapsed entirely. By May, it was over. The greatest air war in human history ended not with a dramatic final battle, but with a whimper. German pilots landed their aircraft, walked away, and went home. There was nothing left to fight with, and no reason to fight anymore. Waldmann survived. That alone is remarkable. Of the 12 pilots who'd started in his original squadron in 1943, he was the only one alive in May 1945. The others had been killed in combat, died in training accidents, or simply disappeared. Survival as a fighter pilot in 1944 and 1945 required not just skill, but extraordinary luck. Waldmann had both, and then, in March 1945, he decided luck wasn't enough anymore. His decision was controversial at the time. Some fellow pilots called him a coward. Others understood. Major Herget, the squadron commander who'd briefed the mission on March 18th, wrote in his private diary that Waldmann was the bravest man he'd ever known. It takes courage to fly combat. It takes even more courage to admit when courage isn't enough. After the war, Waldmann was interviewed by American military historians dozens of times. They wanted to understand the psychological impact of the P-51 Mustang on Luftwaffe pilots. Waldmann was always honest, sometimes brutally so. He told them that the Mustang didn't just win air superiority, it destroyed the will to fight. He said that by 1945, most German pilots knew they were going to die. The only question was when. He said that the few who survived did so by avoiding combat entirely, by landing with engine trouble, by getting lost and ending up at the wrong airfield, anything to avoid going up against P-51s. The interviewers asked him if there was anything Germany could have done differently. Better tactics, better aircraft, better training. Waldmann said no. He said the war was lost the moment American industry fully mobilized. He said Germany's only advantage had been a head start, and once that was gone, the outcome was inevitable. He said the P-51 Mustang was just the most visible symbol of American industrial and technological superiority, but it represented something much larger. An economic system that could produce 15,000 advanced fighters while simultaneously building bombers, tanks, ships, and supplying allies around the world. Germany couldn't compete with that. No one could. He was right. The numbers tell the story. In 1944, the United States produced 96,318 aircraft, every type. Fighters, bombers, transports, trainers. Germany produced 39,807, Japan produced 28,180. The United States, by itself, outproduced the combined Axis powers by more than 2 to 1. And American aircraft weren't just more numerous, they were better. The P-51 Mustang, the P-47 Thunderbolt, the B-17 Flying Fortress, the B-29 Superfortress. These weren't just weapons, they were statements. They said, we can build anything in any quantity, to any standard of quality, and you can't stop us. That was the arsenal of democracy, not a slogan, not propaganda, a fact. American workers, many of them women who'd never held a manufacturing job before the war, built the aircraft that won air superiority over Europe and the Pacific. Rosie the Riveter wasn't a myth, she was real. Her hands built the P-51s that escorted the bombers. Her labor made victory possible, and she did it while raising families, managing households, and holding together a society that had sent millions of men overseas to fight. Main Street America won World War II. Not just the soldiers, but the factory workers, the farmers, the truck drivers, the train conductors, the shipyard workers, the teachers, the nurses, and the million other jobs that kept the country running while waging a two-front war. That generation understood something that's easy to forget today. Freedom isn't free. It costs. It requires sacrifice, and sometimes it requires ordinary people to do extraordinary things. The P-51 Mustang is a symbol of that sacrifice. Every aircraft that rolled off the production line represented thousands of hours of labor. Raw materials mined, processed, and shaped, engines built, tested, and installed, wings assembled, riveted, and inspected, electronics calibrated, weapons mounted, fuel tanks fitted, paint applied. Every single component made by human hands, following blueprints created by American engineers, using processes perfected by American ingenuity. And then, those aircraft flew to England, landed at airfields built by American engineers, were maintained by American ground crews, fueled with American gasoline, refined from American oil, armed with American ammunition manufactured in American factories, and flown by American pilots trained in American flight schools. The entire system, from raw ore in the ground to a fighter at 25,000 feet over Germany, was American. Start to finish. That's what won the air war. Not individual heroism, though there was plenty. Not superior tactics, though American tactics evolved and improved throughout the war, but overwhelming, unstoppable, inevitable industrial and technological superiority. Hans Waldmann understood that. He saw it in the P-51s that killed his wingmen. He saw it in the bomber streams that darkened the sky. He saw it in the statistics that showed German production collapsing while American production accelerated. He knew the war was over long before Germany officially surrendered. He just had the courage to admit it and act accordingly. His story matters because it's not a story about cowardice. It's a story about facing reality, about choosing life over honor when honor means dying for a cause that's already lost. About recognizing when continued resistance isn't bravery, it's suicide. Those are hard truths. The kind of truths that only become clear when you've lost 3 friends in 8 minutes and realized you're next. Waldmann lived until 1983. He never flew again after March 18th, 1945, never even got in a small aircraft as a passenger. He'd spent 12 years in the cockpit, and 8 minutes over Bavaria taught him he never wanted to go back. He became a school teacher in a small town in Bavaria, taught history and mathematics, married, had 3 children, and lived a quiet, unremarkable life. When students asked him about the war, he told them the truth. That war is waste, that victory has costs, that the men who don't come home leave holes that never fully heal. He kept in touch with the families of Meyer, Becker, and Schmidt, wrote letters, visited when he could, attended their funerals when the mothers died. He felt responsible for their deaths, even though he'd done everything he could to keep them alive. That's the burden commanders carry. The names, the faces, the knowledge that decisions you made, actions you took or didn't take, determined who lived and who died. In 1976, Waldmann was invited to an aviation history conference in the United States. German aces were rare by then. Most had died in the war or in the years after. Waldmann was one of the few left. He agreed to go reluctantly. At the conference, he met American pilots who'd flown P-51s over Germany. They shared stories, compared notes, realized they'd probably been in the same sky at the same time, trying to kill each other, One of those pilots asked Waldmann what it was like to face P-51 Mustangs. Waldmann thought for a long moment and then said something the pilot never forgot. He said, "It was like being hunted by something that could see you, but you couldn't see it. Something faster, stronger, more patient, something that didn't make mistakes. Every time we took off, we knew we might not come back. And that knowledge, that certainty of death, breaks you in ways that losing a fight never could." The American pilot, a guy named Mike Thompson who'd flown with the 56th Fighter Group, just nodded. He said he understood that war. It wasn't about glories or heroism. It was about survival, about doing your job and hoping luck stayed with you one more day, about carrying the memory of friends who didn't make it home, about wondering why you survived when better men died. They shook hands, former enemies, united by the understanding that war, it takes everything from everyone involved. Winners and losers both pay the price. The only question is, how much and for how long? This story. It started at 2:47 p.m. on March 18, 1945, when Hans Waldmann landed his Me-109G and decided he was done. But it doesn't end there. It ends with you. Reading or hearing this, understanding what that moment meant, understanding that the P-51 Mustang, it wasn't just a fighter aircraft. It was a manifestation of American industrial power, technological innovation, and national will. It was proof that when America commits to something fully and completely, the outcome is inevitable. But more than that, it was a machine flown by young men, built by American workers, designed by American engineers, and deployed in defense of freedom. Those men, those workers, those engineers, they were your grandparents' generation. They were the people who sat at Sunday dinner tables in small towns across America, listening to the radio, reading letters from the front, hanging stars in windows, and praying for sons who might not come home. Your family was part of that. Maybe your grandfather flew. Maybe your grandmother built aircraft. Maybe your great-uncle died in a bomber over Germany or a fighter over the Pacific. Their generation saved the world, literally. They faced down fascism and totalitarianism and said, "Not here, not ever." And they backed up those words with steel and blood and sacrifice. The P-51 Mustang is their monument. Everyone still flying is a reminder of what they did. Every air show where a restored Mustang roars past is a tribute to the men who flew them and the men who built them. Every photograph, every documentary, every story like this one is a way of saying, we remember, we honor, we will never forget. If preserving these stories matters to you, if honoring the generation that saved the world means something, YouTube has the Super Thanks feature. It's not about the amount, it's about saying that this history is worth keeping alive, that the sacrifice of men like Klaus Meyer, Otto Becker, and Dieter Schmidt shouldn't be forgotten, that the courage of men like Hans Waldmann, who knew when to stop fighting, deserves recognition, that the young Americans who flew P-51s over Europe, many of whom never made it home, earned something more than a name on a memorial wall. This is our history, American history. The history of a generation that faced the greatest evil of the 20th century and defeated it, not because they were perfect, not because war is glorious, but because they understood that some things are worth fighting for, that freedom has a price, and that when called upon, ordinary people can do extraordinary things. Hans Waldmann. He walked away at 2:47 p.m. on March 18, 1945. The war continued without him. The P-51 Mustangs kept flying. The bombers kept striking, and 79 days later, Germany surrendered. The air war was over. The greatest generation had won. Never forget what they did. Never forget what it cost. And never forget that your freedom flies on the wings they built.